Okay, so in order to do our assignment that is due on the day of the test, it will be necessary for you for at least two of the prompts to use Logger Pro to analyze data. And I just want to make sure that you understand how to do that. So when I launch Logger Pro, which if you haven't downloaded and installed it, please do so. It's available in Schoology. So let's just say I collected data on growth rate versus crude birth rate. And I'm just making these numbers up. They don't have to be real numbers, but so I just want to show what I would do. So my x-axis is going to be crude, or it's just going to be growth rate. So I click on this, and then it lets me put in the name of this axis. So I'm going to say growth rate. All right. And I could put units here if I had them, but I don't. And then you'll notice down here, it says that I have growth rate. And then here, did it say that? Yes, okay. And then here, I'm going to go ahead and double click this. And that was crude birth rate. And again, and my unit here I'll say is per 1,000 individuals. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and enter the data. When I do, you'll see the data points pop up in here. So when this was 3.4, my crude birth rate was 14. And when this was 2.1, this was 11. And when this was 1.8, this one was 9. When this one was 0.5, this one was 5. And when this one was 0.1, this one here was 3. Okay. Now, it's not necessarily evident at this point what the relationship is. It kind of looks linear. And part of the problem here is that we don't have our axes established quite correctly here. So the first thing I should do is if I notice all my data is squished towards one end or the other, I want to make sure that all my data is visible. It pretty much fills the screen with a little bit of spare room beyond my data. So my data goes up as high as 14. So I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to choose Graph Options. I'm going to go to where it says Axes Options. And I want the top to be higher than 14, so I'm going to go with 15. I want the bottom to be 0. Now over here, I would like this to be, the largest value is 3.4, so I'm going to go maybe to 5. So this is, notice that this right here is my x-axis, all right? And I want it to go from 0 to 5. Now I see my data kind of sweeps upwards this way. And again, I might think that it's linear, so let's just see what I could do. I have these options here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click here to do a curve fit. And it gives me a number of options. One of them is proportional. That's going to force it through the origin. Not a very good fit. I mean, I suppose I could make the argument that that's what it is, and maybe it is. It does make sense that I would have 0 growth rate. If I had 0 growth rate, I'd have 0 CPR. But let's try this. Instead, I could try a linear fit. That'll probably work well. But in this case, I'm going to try something different. I'm going to go here and use power. Power is a great one to use because a lot of times we have curved data sets and a power function will fit them nicely. Especially notice that this is the equation it's going to use. It's going to take the x variable and raise it to a power of b. So I want to look here. If this turns out to be a 1, a 2, or a 0.5, or a negative of those, I know I'm probably correct that it's a power function. Let's try the fit. Oh, look, that's really close to 0.5, which is a square root. I'm pretty sure this is correct, so I'm going to say OK. So now, here is my function, here's my data. Now, one thing I could do is to test my data is to take another data point and add it to there. So if I collected another data point and I could see how well it fits. So for instance, if I look at this graph here, it says, well, when you have a growth rate of 1, you would anticipate, and if I put my cursor here, it'll tell me, if I look down in the corner here, it tells me that I would expect to be a CBR of about 7.52. So I could check my data tables and see if that's correct. If when I go to a growth rate of 1, I find a CBR of about 7.52, even we're close to that, I go, hey, I think I figured it out. If I get something significantly above or below that, I think, well, maybe I was wrong about that. I should try a different model. So generally, that's what we do. We look at the data, we decide what type of a fit. We make a choice from this list. We pick the fit we feel most comfortable with. Be careful not to do things like this, though. A lot of people say, oh, well, let's see, I'm going to try like a Gaussian. Oh, look at this. Well, it fit great, but if I try to do a prediction, I would find, I guarantee you, when I take the growth rate out here, it's not going to be down here. It's going to be up here. So that's one reason it's a good idea to try a prediction after you've come up with your fit, because often what you find is you have a tendency to want to fit the data really well, which it does, but that's really not the relationship that nature has. So keep in mind that our data is just an approximation of an underlying truth. And a lot of times, I could find these different. Let's see, like I bet you this will fit it great. Right? It may fit it great, but that's not really what the relationship is. I guarantee you, it doesn't go down after this point and then go back up and then go back down. All right. So the best thing to do is to pick either proportional, linear, or inverse square, or power. And power is good because it'll always work. It's just that sometimes the exponent might be a 1, in which case it's linear, or -1, in which case it's inverse. Yeah, but we're not quite done yet. So once I have this, now I want to go ahead and make sure that I have a few things in place. One is, a lot of times when you launch it, it will have this checked. It will have connect the points checked and point symbols not checked. Look what happens when I do that. That's really not very helpful. It doesn't really help the viewer understand where the data is and what the data means. So if you launch Logger Pro and it does this, what we want to do is we want to make sure that we check point symbols, those to see where the data is, and we uncheck the connect the points one, because we don't want that. All right. Now I can see my data. See, I have two of the same ones, so I don't want that. Okay. Now, the other thing is, I should always have a label on my graph. So in addition to labeling my axes, I want my graph itself to have a label. So if you notice up here, this is just the label of the graph itself. So I could just say here, I could say, growth, it'd help if I spelled it right. Growth rate, capitalize it, Eric, versus CBR. Keep in mind, this data is just make-believe. I don't think this relationship is actually true. And now that puts that here. So now I want to cut it and put this into my document. What I recommend you do is shrink it down a little bit, like this. Let's see if I can get it to move over a little bit. Maybe even shrink a little bit more. And then make sure that I can see everything I need. And then I would just take a screenshot of this and I'd paste that into my document. Okay, so that's really how you should approach this data. I think I've covered everything. Good luck with it.